Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving into a stack of sources that challenge, well, pretty much everything you think you know about celestial beings. If I asked you, the listener, right now, to picture an angel, what do you see? You probably see a figure that is serene, maybe beautiful flowing robes, perhaps a halo, and almost certainly a pair of enormous feathered wings. That image, the winged humanoid, it's like the default setting for spirituality today, right?
Yeah.
Defining everything from holiday cards to high art.
And that image is the core contradiction we're digging into today, because
Yeah.
here's the critical pivot, really, of this entire deep dive. Almost everything we picture when we think of an angel, especially that elegant human-like form and those feathered wings, comes from artistic tradition, cross-cultural borrowing, and, frankly, later religious mythology. Not from the original foundational scriptures. The truly biblical celestial beings are, well, they're far more terrifying, geometric, and utterly alien.
Exactly. Our source material highlights this massive, fascinating, and honestly quite dramatic gap between the popular image and what the Bible actually describes. We're talking creatures of fire, beasts with four faces, eyes all over, and these massive spinning wheels that serve as the engine of God's physical movement. It's a complete visual disconnect.
So our core mission today is to trace that evolution. How do we get from A to B? We need to dive into the scriptural data, first off, to isolate the original forms, then track the historical theological systems that tried to categorize them, and then follow their evolution through art history. It's quite a journey.
Yeah, and we're focused on solving that central confusion. Are cherubim, seraphim, and the strange geometric Ophanim simply high-ranking classes of angels, or are they entirely distinct spiritual beings that, later traditions just sort of lumped together under one convenient label?
Exactly. And to understand that that central confusion, we absolutely have to start with the words themselves, the semantics. We have to clarify the terminology, because the meaning of the word angel itself has changed dramatically over 2 millennia.
Right. That seems fundamental.
That's the vital starting point. If we go back to the original Hebrew, the word translated as angel is malach. In Greek, it's angelos. Both literally mean the same thing, messenger or envoy. It is purely a job title.
Just a job title, like postman or diplomat?
Precisely. The source material actually instructs us. Every time you read angel in the early text, mentally replace it with messenger. See how it changes things.
It's purely functional then. Says nothing about their spiritual nature, their appearance.
Nothing. The messengers were those beings delegated to interact with the corporeal world. That was their function. It's only much later, in modern English usage, that angel became this massive, all-encompassing term referring to any kind of spirit being residing in God's heaven.
Ah, so that shift in meaning is really the root of the confusion.
It is. It forces things like four-faced beasts and fiery wheels into the same category as the human-like couriers, which, when you think about it, is pretty odd.
Okay, so from the beginning, we essentially have two distinct types of beings described in the scriptures. Those whose job requires leaving the throne room to communicate with humans,
Messengers, the malach.
and those whose job is simply to be near the throne as guardians or attendants.
The throne guardians, exactly. Two very different roles, two very different descriptions. Okay, let's get into the hard data. The scriptural evidence, starting with the creatures actually called angels in the Bible, the malach, the messenger. The first and probably most shocking key distinction, according to our sources, these beings are never described as having wings.
Never. That's wow. It's so difficult to accept, isn't it? Because the wings are just everywhere in popular culture.
Everywhere. But the biblical texts themselves, silent on the malach having wings.
So what do they look like?
They have human appearances, and they are often mistaken for regular travelers. They just show up.
Like ordinary people.
Yes, they walk, they talk. In one notable case, they even sit down and eat a meal. Remember the angels visiting Abraham in Genesis 18?
Right. He offers them food, and they eat. Very human-like interaction.
Exactly. When these messenger spirits appear on Earth, they take human form and can easily be confused with regular people, which is kind of crucial for their function, right?
Yeah, so?
Well, they are meant to be discreet, often. They need to blend in to deliver a message or assess a situation without causing mass panic or spectacle.
Okay, that makes sense. And you mentioned the example from Genesis 19.
Yes, the most famous example of this confusion. The two angels visit Lot in Sodom. The citizens see them arrive, and what do they assume?
That they're just ordinary men passing through, stopping to rest.
Precisely. There's no description of blinding light, no six wings flapping, no wheels covered in eyes rolling down the street. Just two men.
So the function of these malach is simple. God's envoys.
They leave the immediate presence of the throne. They deliver specific messages. They warn people. Sometimes they execute divine judgment. They operate in the corporeal world. Hence the need for a physical, recognizable, wingless human form.
Okay. Crystal clear on the messengers.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's contrast that with the other beings mentioned, the ones we're calling the throne guardians.
Right?
These are the ones explicitly described with, well, terrifying non-human features, right?
Right.
And they usually stay put near God's throne.
Exactly. Let's start with the cherubim.
Okay.
The cherubim are basically the polar opposite of the messengers in description. Unlike the malach, cherubim are always described as having wings.
Always wings.
And they often possess multiple composite features. They are definitely not human-like. They're more like mosaic creatures. Hybrids.
Hybrids representing what?
Possibly the pinnacle of all different aspects of creation combined. Strength, speed, intelligence, endurance.
Where do we get the best description?
Ezekiel 1 gives the most detailed picture. They are described as possessing 4 distinct faces.
4 faces on one being.
Yes. A human face, representing wisdom or perhaps humanity itself, a lion's face for royalty or strength, an ox's face, symbolizing endurance or service, and an eagle's face, representing speed or maybe sovereignty over the air.
That's quite an image. Anything else?
The sources also note they often have hands under their wings, human-like hands. And sometimes they're described as being covered in eyes all around their bodies, like the Ophanim wheels.
Eyes everywhere. Constant awareness? So what's their job if they're not delivering messages?
Their function is defined by their presence, their location. They guard the boundary between the sacred and the profane.
Ah, like the cherub placed at the entrance to the Garden of Eden after Adam and Eve were expelled. Genesis 3:24.
Exactly that, guarding the way back. But even more importantly, they seem to be the living foundation, the actual mechanism of the throne of God itself.
They don't just stand next to the throne. They are the throne's infrastructure. That's a key distinction.
It's absolutely crucial. Think about the Ark of the Covenant.
Okay. The holiest object in ancient Israel.
It was understood as God's footstool, his presence on earth, and what was on top of it on the mercy seat.
2 golden cherubim facing each other, their wings overshadowing the lid. Exodus 25 tells us that.
Right. And that wasn't just decoration. It was a physical representation, a model of the celestial reality. It emphasized their function as the closest physical representatives of God's rule, the very structure supporting his presence.
So if the malach is about mobility and communication outward,
the cherubim are about being the living, moving platform of the throne itself or guarding that sacred space. They are primal forces of cosmic order, stationary power.
Got it. Primal forces. Okay, what about the seraphim?
Ah, the seraphim. They introduce a really fascinating linguistic and visual twist. The word seraphim itself, its root meaning is connected to fire or burning.
Fire, like fiery beings.
Potentially, but it gets weirder. In places like Numbers 21 and Deuteronomy 8, the word seraph refers to fiery serpents.
Wait, what? The snakes that bit the Israelites in the wilderness?
Those exact ones, venomous desert snakes.
That is an astonishing connection. A high-ranking divine guardian figure linked linguistically to poisonous snakes. How do we square that?
It forces us to think about the context. Fire, purification, maybe even something dangerous or untouchable. When the prophet Isaiah has his famous vision of God's throne in Isaiah chapter 6, the seraphim are described very distinctly. They are 6-winged heavenly beings attending the throne.
6 wings. Okay, more than the cherubim usually have.
Right, and they use them strangely. 2 wings cover their faces, 2 cover their feet, perhaps a sign of humility or shielding from God's glory, and they fly with the middle 2.
Covering their faces and feet. Wow. And what do they do in Isaiah's vision?
Their primary recorded action is ceremonial purification. One seraph takes a burning coal from the altar.
With tongs, presumably.
Yes, with tongs, and touches Isaiah's lips with it, declaring his sin atoned for, purifying him for his prophetic mission.
Okay, so the seraphim aren't messengers going out. Like the melech, they seem to be celestial ministers, focused on purification, perpetual worship right there at the throne.
Exactly. Their focus is entirely on God's immediate holiness and glory, so intense they have to shield themselves.
So, wrapping up this biblical section, the key takeaway seems to be,
the crucial takeaway, confirmed by our sources, is that the Bible itself does not explicitly call cherubim or seraphim a class of angels.
it doesn't use that specific classification.
No, it describes distinct beings with distinct appearances and functions. It is later Jewish and Christian tradition, what one source calls pious myth, perhaps a bit harshly, that decides to categorize them all together, lumping the wingless human messengers, the four-faced winged beasts, and the six-winged fiery attendants all under the single umbrella term of angelic beings.
And that's the essential transition point, isn't it? Scripturally, the differences are stark. Discrete human-looking messengers with no wings versus multi-winged, multi-faced, sometimes fiery throne guardians.
Absolutely distinct. But these differences quickly blur once later theology comes into play, seeking to impose an ordered, formalized system on the heavens. Things get tidied up. And here's where it gets really interesting theologically speaking, because the desire to organize the cosmos, to put everything in its proper place, is deeply human and deeply theological. Once the church, and the synagogue too, began systematizing their beliefs, these distinct scriptural creatures, they were absorbed. They got pulled into these vast, complex theological systems that formalized them into strict, manageable hierarchies, ranks and orders.
Like an organizational chart for heaven.
Pretty much. And the most influential model, the one that really governs how most people today, consciously or not, think about angelic ranks, is the Christian hierarchy. It's heavily derived from the writings of a figure known as Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite.
Pseudo-Dionysius, meaning not the actual Dionysius mentioned in the book of Acts.
Correct. A later writer, probably 5th or 6th century Syria, using the name for authority. His work, later picked up and refined by Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century, established the famous 9 levels, or choirs, of angels grouped into 3 spheres, or triads.
The 9 levels. Okay, I've heard of that. Seraphim, cherubim, thrones.
Exactly. And if you look closely at that hierarchy, where did the non-human creatures we just discussed end up? The ones the Bible describes as primal forces.
Where?
Right at the very top, closest to God, permanently fixed in what Dionysius called the first sphere, the highest order.
Wait, let me make sure I have this straight. You're saying the seraphim fiery, 6-winged beings linked to snakes, and the cherubim 4-faced winged beasts are ranked higher than the actual Malach, the messengers like Gabriel who visited Mary.
That's precisely the structure Dionysius laid out, and Aquinas largely affirmed. It's one of the great ironies, perhaps. The highest order, the first sphere, consists of the seraphim, the cherubim, sometimes called Shayot, the living creatures from Ezekiel, and the thrones, often equated with the Ophanim wheels, or another group called Cherubim.
And the beings we normally just call angels, the messengers.
They reside way down in the lowest order, the third sphere, along with archangels and principalities.
That's fascinating. And Aquinas actually made an observation that supports this, right? About who gets sent out.
Yes, Aquinas noted something very consistent with the original Malach tradition. He argued that typically only the lower orders, the archangels and the angels, are the ones God sends to manifest themselves in the corporeal world, to interact with humans.
So the scary ones stay home.
Essentially, yes. The highest creatures, the terrifying, multi-formed beings of the first sphere, they generally don't leave the throne room in this schema. Their job is contemplation and sustaining the cosmic order.
So that separation of function, even in the later hierarchy, it still echoes the original biblical distinction.
It does. Some are messengers designed for interaction and conveyance between realms, and some are primal beings meant only for celestial worship, maintaining cosmic structures and reflecting God's immediate, overwhelming glory. The highest ranks, in this view, aren't really concerned with humanity's day-to-day affairs. They're running the universe, so to speak.
Now, this systematic urge wasn't just a Christian thing, was it? Jewish traditions also developed hierarchies.
Oh, absolutely. Jewish traditions proposed various hierarchies, often as part of a broader philosophical or mystical project. The sources mention lists of 10 ranks developed by major figures like Maimonides in the 12th century, and also within the mystical traditions of Kabbalah, particularly the Zohar.
Maimonides, the great rationalist philosopher, why was he creating angel hierarchies?
Well, Maimonides was trying to synthesize Jewish faith with Aristotelian philosophy. He needed to create an intellectual map of reality, from God down to the physical world. His hierarchy served that purpose. It laid out a chain of being, a structure for how divine influence flows down.
What did his hierarchy look like? Any familiar names?
Yes, it includes 10 ranks. At the top, you have the Chayot HaKodesh, the holy living creatures, often identified with the Seraphim or Cherubim. Then it goes down through beings like the Ophanim, the Wheels, the Cherubim, the Hashmalim, all the way to the lowest ranks. The Malachim, the messengers, are original angels, and the Ishim, described as man-like beings closest to humanity.
So again, the messengers are at the lower end, closer to us.
Consistently, yes. The structure emphasizes that chain of emanation and authority from the immediate divine presence down to the physical world.
And how does this connect to Kabbalah? You mentioned the Sephiroth.
Right. This ties directly into the deeply mystical Kabbalistic worldview. For Kabbalists, the entire universe isn't just created by God, it's constructed through a series of divine emanations. These are the 10 Sephiroth, often called intelligences or potencies, which proceed from the ultimate unknowable divine source, the Ayin Sof, the boundless.
So the angels in Kabbalah aren't just inhabitants of heaven. They're more like active principles, building blocks of reality.
In a way, yes. Each of the Sephiroth is associated with an angelic world or order that helps manifest that particular divine attribute and construct the universe. For instance, the second Sephirah, Chokmah, wisdom, considered a primary active or masculine potency, is associated with the angelic world of the Ophanim.
The wheels are linked to wisdom.
Directly linked. This means the Ophanim aren't just transport. They are metaphysically tied to the concept of primal divine wisdom. It makes them central to the Kabbalistic map of creation. Really profound stuff.
Okay, let's quickly touch on Islam. Does it have similar hierarchies?
Islam definitely categorizes celestial beings. Angels are very important in the Quran. But the source material notes it lacks a single, universally standard hierarchy that strictly parallels those neat Christian spheres we discussed. Instead, the order in Islam is generally defined more by the specific jobs assigned to the angels. It's more administrative,
Right?
functional.
Administrative angels, like what?
Well, the scholar Fakhr al-Din al-Razi, back in the 12th, 13th century, divided angels into about 8 groups based on these duties. You have the Hamalat al-Arsh, the carriers of the throne, often compared to the Seraphim, and the Mukarrabun, usually seen as the Cherubim, who surround the throne constantly praising God, very similar to the top ranks elsewhere. Then you have the familiar archangels like Gabriel, and Michael, who carry out high-level divine tasks.
But Islam also has some quite specific and maybe darker angelic roles, doesn't it? Especially concerning judgment.
That's right, showing that divine administration covers all aspects of existence, good and bad. There's Malik, who is named in the Quran as the principal angel guarding hell, the gatekeeper, and the Zabaniya, described sometimes as 19 harsh, severe angels who assist Malik carrying out the punishment of sinners. It paints a picture of a very structured cosmic law enforcement.
Wow. And what about fallen angels like Iblis,
Yeah.
Satan? How is he depicted?
Our sources note that Iblis, in Islamic art and tradition, is often depicted as a monstrous figure, sometimes with horns, sometimes with black skin. But interestingly, he's sometimes shown with burned wings.
Burned wings. Why?
As a visual sign of his former higher angelic status before his rebellion and fall, the wings mark him as once belonging to that celestial realm.
So whether you're looking at Maimonides, Pseudo-Dionysius, or Islamic scholars, the impulse seems the same.
Exactly. To order the here terrifying, multifaceted power of the divine realm into something structured, something comprehensible, even if it means forcing geometric beasts, fiery serpents, and human-like messengers into one single, albeit stratified, family tree. Now, we absolutely must come to what is arguably the most complex, the most bizarre, and truly the most alien image in all of these celestial descriptions, the Ophanim.
The wheels.
Yes. These are the beings that fundamentally challenge our very human-centric view of what spiritual reality might look like. They are not humanoid at all.
They are the wheels from the Hebrew Ophanim. And they're inseparable from Ezekiel's vision of the Merkava, right?
Yeah.
The heavenly chariot.
Absolutely inseparable. Described vividly in Ezekiel chapter 1 and again in chapter 10, they aren't just pulling the chariot, they are the chariot's mechanism.
They're the engine of God's sovereignty, his physical movement.
Exactly. And the description, it's so visually overwhelming, it almost borders on the psychedelic, or maybe just incomprehensible in normal terms. Ezekiel describes 4 immense luminescent wheels, sparkling like topaz or beryl. And crucially, he describes their structure as a wheel intersecting a wheel.
A wheel intersecting a wheel. What does that even mean? Like 2 oops linked together? Or something more complex?
It seems more complex, like a multi-axis structure, maybe gyroscopic, something that seems to defy the normal physics of turning or direction. It suggests movement in any direction without pivoting.
Okay, and then there are the eyes.
Oh yes, the eyes. Their rims, Ezekiel says, are high and awesome, and these rims are covered, completely covered in eyes all around.
Eyes on the wheels. That's unsettling.
Deeply. And they don't operate alone. They function as a completely symbiotic entity with the 4 multi-faced cherubim we discussed earlier. The spirit of the living creatures, the cherubim, is in the wheels. They move together instantly.
And they move toward any of the 4 cardinal directions: forward, backward, left, right, without ever turning their axis. Instantaneous, nonlinear movement.
They are essentially perpetual motion machines of awareness, functioning as the actual chariots, the undercarriage of God's throne, driven by the spirit that indwells the cherubim. The Ophanim's role is pure execution, ensuring the throne moves exactly where the spirit wills it to go, instantly.
This isn't just bizarre imagery for its own sake, is it? This functional description is deeply symbolic.
Oh, absolutely. It reveals fundamental theological truths about God's nature. The very features of the Ophanim map out God's attributes. They give us a visual metaphor for his power.
Okay, break that down. The multi-directional movement.
The ability to move anywhere instantly, without stopping to turn, that immediately suggests omnipresence, God's ability to be everywhere at once, motion unbounded by physical space or direction.
Makes sense. And the eyes. All those eyes covering the rims.
Pure, unadulterated omniscience. An Ophanim covered in eyes must see everything, all directions, all at once. It reflects God's all-seeing, all-knowing nature. It suggests an awareness that lacks limited self-awareness or free will. Its function is total awareness.
Okay. Omnipresence, omniscience. What about the unified motion? The fact they move instantly with the cherubim, guided by the Spirit.
That shows absolute instantaneous submission to God's will, which indicates omnipotence. They are an engine that is simultaneously aware, unbound by space, and totally, utterly obedient to the divine impulse.
And the theological significance of this vision, especially for Ezekiel himself.
It's tied directly to his situation. Remember, Ezekiel is seeing this terrifying mobile vision while he's in exile in Babylon, far away from the temple in Jerusalem, which was the traditional dwelling place of God's glory.
Right, the temple was destroyed or about to be.
Exactly. So the sheer mobility of the Merkava, powered by these all-seeing, everywhere-going Ophanim wheels, was a fundamental assurance. It meant God was not confined to a single building or a single geographical location.
God wasn't stuck in Jerusalem.
Precisely. God's deity could leave the temple, could be experienced powerfully even in the midst of exile, and crucially, could eventually return. It's a fundamental message of God's sovereignty over place and circumstance, and a message of hope in a time of terrible dislocation.
Wow, okay. But this imagery, it's so strange. Does it resonate beyond theology? You mentioned psychological interpretations.
It does get even more complex and maybe more intriguing when you view it through a psychological or mystical lens. It's one thing to say the wheels symbolize omniscience. It's another thing entirely to try and picture a constantly moving wheel covered in eyes. That image definitely jumps from abstract theology into the realm of, well, pure psychological terror and awe. You can see why someone like Carl Jung might be interested.
Jung, what was his take?
Well, Jung saw angels generally as these powerful reconciling symbols. Archetypes bubbling up from the collective unconscious, capable of bridging opposites within the psyche. He thought they often appear in dreams or visions when something really important needs to be communicated from the unconscious to the conscious mind, often signaling a call towards individuation, towards psychological wholeness.
And the Ophanim specifically, that bizarre geometry.
That specific geometric structure, a wheel intersecting a wheel, has sparked some really mind-bending interpretations, connecting to physics and consciousness studies. Some commentators looking at that description suggest it might represent something called a Clifford torus.
A Clifford torus. Okay, what on earth is that? Can you give us an analogy?
Okay, well, a Clifford torus is a complex mathematical object. It's essentially the surface of a shape existing in 4 dimensions of space. Think about it like this. Imagine a 2D creature living on a flat sheet of paper. If a 3D sphere passed through its 2D world,
What would the 2D creature see?
it would see a point appear, grow into a circle, reach a maximum size, then shrink back to a point and disappear. It couldn't perceive the sphere's 3D depth.
Okay.
The suggestion is that the Ophanim structure, this wheel intersecting a wheel, might be how a 4th-dimensional object or rotation would appear when perceived by our limited 3D consciousness. Ezekiel could only approximate this complex, higher-dimensional form using the language and concepts available to him spinning, intersecting wheels.
So Ezekiel might have been describing hyperspace, or the mechanics of dimensions beyond our own, glimpsed in a visionary state.
That's one interpretation put forward in the sources, yes.
Yeah.
That humans can potentially experience hyperspace or multidimensional reality in certain altered states of consciousness. And the plethora of eyes reinforces this, suggesting a mode of awareness, perhaps native to that higher dimension that is far beyond normal human capability. Total simultaneous perception.
Okay, that's already pretty mind-blowing. But the sources mention an even stranger connection, don't they, to modern experiences?
Yes. This is where it gets truly weird and potentially profound. Our source material documents a fascinating connection between the Ophanim's very specific visual description and reports from modern psychedelic experiences, particularly those induced by powerful compounds like DMT or sometimes high doses of psilocybin mushrooms.
People are seeing Ezekiel's wheels now?
Apparently, yes. Multiple contemporary accounts, documented in forums, research papers, anecdotal reports, attest that people have reported seeing an entity or structure described as a wheel within a wheel, often covered in eyes or made of shifting complex geometry. And crucially, these reports often come from individuals who claim they had no prior knowledge of Ezekiel's biblical description before their experience.
No prior knowledge, they just see it.
That's the claim. They describe seeing this complex, geometric, sometimes mechanical-seeming eye-covered structure. Sometimes it's perceived as a guide or a kind of mother machine, leading them towards what they perceive as source or profound metaphysical insight.
That is staggering. If true, it suggests the archetype isn't just cultural, it's somehow deeper.
Exactly. It suggests this specific, bizarre image might be deeply, perhaps fundamentally ingrained in the human psyche, hardwired maybe. An archetype that resurfaces consistently across millennia, across vastly different cultural contexts and mental states. It forces us to ask, are these shared foundational components of consciousness itself breaking through? Is this what the architecture of reality looks like at some deeper level? Hashtag V. From wingless messengers to iconic art.
Okay. So let's try and tie this all back to our starting point and the visual betrayal, maybe. If the Bible describes Ophanim as geometric wheels covered in eyes, cherubim as four-faced winged beasts, and the actual Malak angels as wingless men, easily mistaken for travelers, where in the world did our popular image, the beautiful, serene, white-robed, feathered, winged humanoid angel actually come from? You implied earlier. It's basically borrowed Roman iconography. Like the angel on my Christmas card is essentially a repurposed Roman propaganda symbol.
In many ways. Yeah, pretty much. It's maybe a blunt way to put it, but there's a lot of truth there. The answer lies almost entirely in art history, aesthetic preference, and crucially, the strategic cross-pollination of Roman classicism into the burgeoning Christian faith as it gained power.
So let's trace that. What did the earliest Christian art show?
The earliest known Christian depictions of angels, like the famous Annunciation fresco in the Catacomb of Priscilla in Rome, dating from the mid-3rd century, show the angel Gabriel visiting Mary without wings.
No wings at all.
Nope. He's just depicted as a young man wearing a Roman tunic, looking very much like the wingless Malak messenger type.
So the wingless human-like phase lasted for quite a while then. A couple of centuries at least.
It did. The first definitive depictions of angels with wings appear noticeably later, around the end of the 4th century AD. A key example cited is the Princess sarcophagus, found in Constantinople, dating to the time of Emperor Theodosius I, around 379-395.
And what was happening around that time? End of the 4th century.
That's the crucial context. Christianity was transitioning from a persecuted minority sect to becoming the official state religion of the Roman Empire. It was moving into basilicas, adopting imperial protocols. And the shift to winged angels seems primarily visual and symbolic, not driven by some new theological discovery.
Why wings specifically? Why adopt that particular feature?
Because Christianity was integrating itself into the vast, powerful visual language of the Roman Empire. And they needed a recognizable shorthand. A symbol for speed, for triumph, for heavenly action, for bridging the gap between heaven and earth. And the most readily available, universally understood symbol for that in Roman art was
the winged figure.
Exactly. Specifically, the winged victories, the goddess Nike in Greek art, or Victoria in Roman art.
Ah, the goddess of victory, always shown with wings.
Always. These winged victories were incredibly prominent on Roman coins, triumphal arches, sculptures.
Yeah.
Everywhere. They symbolize the swift, unstoppable triumph of the emperor, the legions, the state itself.
So Christian artists essentially just borrowed that existing powerful visual symbol.
They adapted it. They took the shorthand for rapid, successful movement from heaven, or signifying divine approval, and they affixed it to their celestial messengers, the angels. It made them instantly look more official, more powerful, more divine within that Roman visual culture.
Makes perfect sense from a communication standpoint.
Yeah.
But did the theologians object?
Well, they had to offer a justification, didn't they? They couldn't just say, we copied the pagan gods. St. John Chrysostom, a major church father writing around this very time, late 4th, early 5th century, provided the standard explanation. He argued that the wings weren't literal physical appendages, they were symbolic.
Symbolic of what?
They signified the sublimity of the angel's nature, their heavenly origin. And crucially, they showed that angels leave the heights and descend to approach human nature with incredible speed and ease. So it made the abstract concept of spiritual movement instantly visual and relatable to an audience completely steeped in Roman imperial aesthetics. Problem solved.
Okay, so that covers the standard angel. What about the more complex creatures? The Seraphim and Cherubim. How did art handle their terrifying descriptions? 6 wings, 4 faces.
Yeah, they got adapted too, often by simplifying them dramatically. The full-on Ezekiel description is hard to depict appealingly, right? The multi-winged aesthetic itself wasn't entirely novel either. It drew partially from older, Near Eastern and Persian art, where multi-winged figures often symbolized immense power or cosmic status.
So that fit into depicting the highest ranks.
Exactly. That multi-winged look was typically reserved for the highest grades in the hierarchy. The Seraphim and Cherubim, and usually shown only in purely heavenly contexts surrounding God's throne. This eventually led, especially in the Renaissance, to depictions of cherubim being reduced to just winged heads, sometimes called puditeste.
Just a head with wings, why?
To emphasize their primary qualities in the hierarchy, pure intelligence, contemplation, and their proximity to God. It visually stripped away the monstrous beast aspects from Ezekiel, making them seem more purely intellectual and less frightening.
Let's talk about gender for a moment, because the modern popular angel is often quite feminine, or at least very beautifully androgynous. But theologically, angels are spirit beings, right? No gender.
Correct. Theological sources are clear. Angels are spirit. They don't reproduce. They don't have sexual difference in the human sense. They don't eat, excrete, etc.
So how did art navigate depicting these genderless beings? Do they usually appear male?
Early on, yes, often depicted as young men, as we saw in the catacombs. But Byzantine art, which was hugely influential in shaping the iconic image of the archangel especially, found a very specific human model.
Which was?
Court eunuchs.
Eunuchs, really?
Yes. In the Byzantine imperial court, eunuchs often rose to positions of great trust and authority. They served as chamberlains, administrators, and, importantly, as reliable imperial messengers. Visually, they often had refined features, were beardless, and wore rich, often white and gold-decorated tunics or robes of office. They lacked the rugged, masculine features of soldiers or classical heroes.
So the visual template for the classical, ethereal, often androgynous-looking archangel like Michael or Gabriel was modeled partly on high-ranking, non-threatening, but authoritative human messengers in the imperial court.
It seems that way. It provided a recognizable, ideal, spiritual-looking, non-procreating, clean, eternally youthful, associated with authority but not brute force. Byzantine artists appear to have consciously or unconsciously adopted this look for the great archangels.
Fascinating. And female characteristics.
Generally absent in most historical depictions until much later. While angels might appear feminine due to robes or long hair by our standards, specific female features like breasts really only start appearing commonly in art, especially funerary art in the 19th century, part of a broader sentimentalizing trend.
Okay, we should also quickly acknowledge the even deeper pre-Christian roots. These winged hybrids didn't just spring from Roman victories, did they?
Oh no, the idea of powerful, winged, hybrid beings serving the divine or guarding sacred spaces is ancient, very ancient. Look at the Assyrian Lamassu, those colossal statues guarding palace gates. Human head, body of a lion or bull, massive wings. They're protective deities.
And the cherubim seem related to that tradition.
Very likely. The composite features the guardian role at boundaries. It draws heavily on that established Near Eastern visual language for powerful hybrid celestial guardians. It wasn't created in a vacuum.
And the seraphim, with their link to fire and serpents. Any precursors there?
That imagery also likely drew on existing ancient symbols. Specifically, scholars point to the Egyptian protective symbol, the uraeus.
The upright cobra seen on pharaoh's crowns.
Exactly, a symbol of divine authority, protection, and potentially dangerous power. This could easily link the concept of the fiery serpent, the seraph, and by extension the angelic seraphim, to establish symbols of protective, perhaps intimidating divine power in the wider Near East.
And then there's the figure that often gets confused with cherubim today, the little winged baby.
Yes, the Puto. This comes from a completely different lineage. It's a revival of the Greek Eros, or Cupid, in Roman mythology.
The mischievous little winged infants associated with love and desire.
Those guys. They were revived during the Italian Renaissance as decorative figures, the putti, plump, winged infants symbolizing divine attendance, joy, sometimes just pure decoration. And somehow, in popular English usage, these puttis became mistakenly called cherubs.
Which is, as you said, the ultimate aesthetic betrayer.
It really is. When you think about it, the cherubim of the Bible are these awesome, terrifying, four-faced, multi-winged creatures embodying God's power at the highest level, and they get reduced in the popular imagination to a chubby, naked baby with tiny wings. It shows how profoundly theological concepts can be watered down by aesthetic preference until they become cute, harmless, and purely decorative.
This whole process,
Yeah.
the borrowing, the adapting, it happened even within Jewish art, despite concerns about idolatry.
It did. While mainstream rabbinic Judaism has historically been cautious about depicting angels, precisely for fear of encouraging idolatry or magical practices, Jewish art throughout history still exists, and it reflects the surrounding cultures. We find examples like the 3rd century Dura Europos synagogue in Syria, which shows wingless humanoid angels dressed like contemporary Persians again, emphasizing the human-like messenger role. But other Jewish art, especially from later periods or different regions, certainly does feature winged humanoids, clearly drawing on the prevailing artistic conventions of their time and place. It shows that even when doctrine might be strict, artistic expression often follows broader aesthetic trends.
Wow, okay. We started this deep dive with what seemed like a simple question about, classifying celestial beings. Angels, cherubim, seraphim. They're the same or different. And we've ended up crossing millennia of history, theology, intricate debates about hierarchy, mind-bending mystical visions, psychology, ancient Near Eastern art, Roman goddesses, Byzantine eunuchs, and even maybe hyperspace dimensions.
It certainly spiraled.
It really did. And the journey pretty clearly confirms that the truth about these beings, at least as presented in the foundational texts, is far more complex, far more mechanical in some ways, and frankly, far more awe-inspiring and terrifying than the simple, comfortable winged human myth suggests.
I think the final synthesis bringing it all together is this. The cherubim, the seraphim, and especially the Ophanim are consistently described in the original sources, Ezekiel, Isaiah, as monstrous, composite, multi-sensory creatures. They seem fixed near God's throne, or they function as the actual mechanism of his movement, the Merkava. They are these complex symbols of God's absolute power, his inescapable knowledge, his omnipresence. They reflect the terrifying efficiency and otherness of the divine.
Right, they are not relatable. They're cosmic hardware.
Exactly. In stark contrast, the beings we commonly refer to today simply as angels, the malak of the original text, were just that, discrete divine messengers. They typically had a human and significantly a wingless appearance, allowing them to interact within the human world without causing undue disruption.
And the popular decision over centuries to combine these two dramatically different types, the human-like messengers and the geometric or bestial guardians, into a single, uniform angelic hierarchy.
That seems purely a product of post-biblical tradition, theological systematizing, and artistic license, driven largely by the adoption and adaptation of pagan Roman and Greek visual mythology. Wings became standard because victory had wings.
We have to remember, too, the original point of that Merkava vision for Ezekiel.
Absolutely crucial. The ultimate theological goal of describing that terrifying mobile throne with its cherubim and Ophanim was to affirm God's absolute mobility and sovereignty over all things, everywhere, especially in a time of exile and destruction. The sheer complexity and power of the Ophanim ensures that God is understood as unbound by place, all-seeing, and capable of operating powerfully far outside the confines of human temples or expectations.
Okay, and that, I think, leads us perfectly into our final provocative thought for you, the listener, to consider as we wrap up. Reflect once more on that core description of the Ophanim, a perpetually moving wheel, intersecting another wheel, covered in eyes, moving in instant unified response to the spirit guiding a four-faced creature. If this image, as some of our sources suggest, is truly an ancient, profound archetype of consciousness itself, maybe even linked visually to the appearance of a fourth-dimensional object like the Clifford torus, glimpsed in visionary states,
Then what does it potentially mean for our modern understanding of reality? that this exact, complex, seemingly bizarre geometric vision can apparently be reliably experienced and reported by people across centuries. People in vastly different cultural settings, different psychological states, sometimes with no prior knowledge of the biblical text. Could it be that the deepest, most foundational structures of heaven, or perhaps the very architecture of the human mind or consciousness itself, are far more mechanical, geometric, multidimensional, and, well, alien than our comfortable, inherited, human-shaped religious imagery has ever allowed us to portray?